Got 7 o'clock. I will call to order the January 24th meeting of the Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Seaman?
Here.
Mr. Kouskoudis? Here. Mr. Stavropoulos? Mr. Vesey?
Here.
Ms. Vigil?
Here.
Mr. Koulianos?
Here.
Mr. Andriotis?
All right. Item number 2 on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of October 18th, 2021.
Second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Ms. Vigil?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. All right. Item number 3, a little organizational business. We need to elect the chair and vice chair for the year.
Move that the chairperson remain the same.
I move that the vice chair remain the same.
No,
That's
one
not
at a
exactly how this works.
One at a time.
Well, we'll start with the chair. So any nominations for the position of chair?
I think I've made a nomination.
Okay, any other nominations besides Mr. Seaman? All right, seeing as there are none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair remains the same. All right, calling all nominations for vice chair.
I move that Mike Kouskoudis be vice chair.
All right, any other nominations for vice chair? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, vice chair remains the same. Well, that was easy peasy.
That was quick and easy. Moving right along. Item number 4, Ordinance 2022-02, amending the Land Development Code, Section 5606, related to mobile food dispensing vehicles as an accessory to food and drink establishments. Does the staff have a report, please?
Thank you. Rob Eschenfelder from our city attorney's office is here to address that. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, congratulations on your hard fart campaigns. It's a vigorous display of democracy. I'm Robert Eschenfelder with the City Attorney's Office, and this ordinance that's before you, y'all recall back in 2020 that you were part of the review process for the new food truck regulations that the city had adopted. You'll recall that the legislature passed a bill that prohibited any local government from outright banning food trucks throughout an entire jurisdiction, and the city, that was the state of the city's rules at that time, and so they had to develop something to allow for them, and there was a lengthy process. Y'all recall that the city went through with that. Y'all had a hearing, and the commission had a hearing, and so what came out of that is 2 new sections of the code that recognize certain zones where the food trucks could operate in, and then the code that we have before us tonight, which allows for an accessory use of a food truck at certain restaurants, brick and mortar restaurants and drinking establishments. And so y'all may know or recall that there was litigation, a lawsuit filed against the city over the code. I defended the city in that case, and we did prevail in that litigation. But in looking at the code and talking with the planning staff about how it's worded and so forth, I did, sort of bring up to them, as to subsection 9, that second sentence, which we're recommending to you be stricken, dealing with the display of a graphic image, name, or branding of the primary food or drink establishment. And the way it's worded, it's really kind of too vague to let a business owner or a food truck understand what size the sign would be, or how the graphic would be. It's just not really precise enough. But rather than try to rewrite it, in talking to Ms. Vincent, the planning director, about how the professional staff would recommend to go, she indicated, number one, no one has even filed an application using this, so it's really all just theoretical. But the reality is, since the city staff would be going through and reviewing the application and seeing where the truck would be placed and so forth, they already know, that why the truck would be there, if it's there at particular hours. And so the recommendation of staff, as well as the recommendation of our office, is just to go ahead and drop that second sentence. And so that's what's before you all today. That's the recommendation. Now I'll take any questions if there are any.
I have some questions. Just a little history. I kind of fought a little hard on this particular ordinance. And I'm glad to see that it was honed and tightened up a little bit. I do have a couple concerns. Well, not concerns, just to define it a little bit better, is, one of the things that when an applicant has an existing business, we grant them signage. So if somebody was to have a food truck, whatever signs they put on their food truck would have to comply with the sign requirements. In other words, if they're maximizing their signage on their building, now they bring in a food truck, they can't add additional signage because that would increase their maximum sign allowance, if that makes any sense. So I think that would have to be addressed. In addition, parking. If somebody's going to bring a food truck to their ongoing business and that food truck occupies 3 or 4 parking spaces or 2 parking spaces, that should go against their parking requirements. Because if they are required to have so many parking spaces, now they put a food truck in their parking lot, then that would reduce their parking, and and I think that needs to be looked at as well. And I understand what you're saying as far as that subparagraph 9, that a mobile food dispensing vehicle may only be operated by the primary business as an extension of the primary business. So in other words, somebody's going to have to be in the food business to put a food truck. I think that's what you're referring to, not an ancillary.
That's correct. And if you look at the overall regulatory scheme, it's only going to allow you to apply for this accessory use permit if you are a food and drink establishment. And so bookstore, for instance, couldn't apply. With respect to the parking spaces, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's part of what they would have to put into their accessory use application. They're required to do a site plan that shows the city staff, because not all trucks are even the same size,
Right.
So they might take up space, they might not. And so staff would compare what they're proposing and how that would cut into parking spaces or whatever as factors in whether they even grant it, because you're not guaranteed that permit. It's something you have to apply for. So I think rather than calling out a particular number, I think that it's best just to let that accessory use application process play out the way it would. And again, this is kind of all theoretical, because in the 2 years that this ordinance has been in the books, not one business has come in to even file an application, so.
Okay. And the issue with regard to signage, that would be part of that?
Yeah, I think that's already covered. I also had the wonderful fun of rewriting the city's sign code, and that's covered in the vehicle signs, the mobile vehicle signs part of the sign code. So I think that's already covered there. It doesn't have to be repeated here.
Well, so just so I'm clear, if somebody has a motor vehicle sign, and they park that motor vehicle sign on their existing property, then that signage calculation is going into their overall sign requirement.
It becomes a prohibited sign. It falls into the category of prohibited sign if it's parked there for a certain length of time. And so the idea is that these food trucks that would be parking here, they would only be doing it just for the dinner hour or whatever, and then it would have to be moved away. Okay. And so in that situation, that would be fine.
And if somebody were having an event, that's a special permit, that's not covered under the ordinance?
Well, there's a separate permit for special events, yeah, but this is more of a ongoing basis. The accessory use permit would be an ongoing basis, like every Friday, Saturday, I'm going to do it, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Not so much a question, but just a clarification. so that I understand it right, is that the purpose of tonight's ordinance revision is simply to strike the requirement of equal signage of their primary business and the mobile truck, is that they're no longer going to be required to show that it's going to be obvious that it is,
That's correct.
as part of
It's
the
just striking.
application process that's done before they ever arrive.
Correct.
That's all that we're talking about
Just
tonight.
striking that second sentence.
Super, thank you.
Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much.
You want me to make a motion to approve?
All right.
I'll make a motion
Yeah.
to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Can we have a roll call?
Do you want to go to the audience?
I was going to say,
Oh,
have you
yes.
asked for public comment?
Sorry.
No worries.
Are there members of the public here wishing to speak on this item? All right, seeing none,
I'll renew my motion.
back to your motion.
I'll renew my motion.
And I'll second the renewed motion.
All right, now for the roll call.
Is there any discussion on the motion? We just want to make sure that we call for discussion on the motion for purposes of the record.
Okay,
I think I've discussed my concerns, so
yeah, seeing no discussion, back to your motion
back to my motion.
and your second. Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Ms. Vehil?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. All right, can we have the quasi-judicial announcement and swearing of speakers?
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Planning and Zoning Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board wishing to disclose any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest this evening? Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak this evening, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. So sworn.
All right, that brings us to item number 6, application 21-133, which has been deferred to a date certain, February 28th, 2022, meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. That brings us to item number 7, application 21-75, site plan approval for Live Oak at Anclote River Crossings. It's residential townhomes located on the northwest corner of Live Oak and Athenian Way. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, Ally Keene, Senior Planner. This property, again, is located off of Live Oak Street and Athenian Way. It's outlined in red here on your screen. This property is located within the city's special area plan. This map is showing an excerpt from the SMART code, which regulates the properties in the special area plan, showing the transect zones. This particular property is located in the T4C transect zone, which is the yellow on the screen. It is adjacent to the Municipal Gateway Special District to the east. There's T5D to the south and to the west, which is the North Pinellas Ave District. The applicants are here today seeking site plan approval for the Live Oak at Anclote River Crossings development. This is a 10-unit residential townhome development totaling in just under 25,500 square feet of gross floor area. The site plan does provide adequate parking and landscaping to meet the requirements of the SMART code. This is a look at the proposed site plan. It's a series of 5 different buildings that have 2 units each, so a total of 10 units. The buildings are oriented towards Athenian Way, which is a private street in the Anclote Crossing development. It does have private or public street frontage along Live Oak, both along the south property line and the west property line. The applicants provided a preliminary rendering of the elevations of the townhomes, which is shown here. This is the view from the Athenian Way frontage. This table provides an overview of the lot and building requirements within the SMART code for the T4C district. As far as building placement and form, again, these buildings are proposed to be oriented towards Athenian Way. They are proposing to construct a street screen along the Live Oak frontages. This is to fulfill their frontage requirements. They are requesting a few warrants in relationship to the street screen, which I'll go into more detail here in just a minute. The building function is residential, that is a permitted use by right within this transect zone. As far as parking goes, they are providing each unit parking with an attached garage and a driveway. The code would require a minimum of 1.5 spaces per unit or 15 spaces. They are providing 2 spaces per unit for a total of 20 spaces. As far as landscaping, the SMART code requires a minimum number of landscaping within the first layer. That's the area between the buildings and the public street frontages. The provided landscape plan does meet the minimum requirements. They're also proposing to put a majority of the required plantings on the outside of the proposed street screen to provide additional address and aesthetics to the street frontage. When looking at the street screen, the SMART code requires that a street screen be constructed whenever a building facade is not at the frontage line. The frontage line is also the maximum setback established in the code. On the site plan, this blue line here is showing where the proposed street screen would be located. It is required along the Live Oak and north-south frontage as well as the east-west frontage. It's required along that frontage because the buildings, again, are pushed up towards Athenian Way, so they're not at the maximum setback line. They are proposing 2 different warrants, one in relationship to the location of the street screen and one for the material. The first is along the principal frontage, which is this east-west frontage here. The maximum setback for the principal frontage is 10 feet. They are proposing to have the street screen pushed back to a minimum of 13 feet for a majority of the frontage, but up to about 20 feet in this direction here. For the street screen. The additional area allows for them to stay outside of an existing drainage and utility easement. It also allows for the preservation of some existing mature trees in this location. There is also a lift station along this frontage that this would jog around. The second part of the location warrant is for the secondary frontage, which is this north-south piece. The maximum setback for the secondary frontage is 5 feet. They are proposing this again to be at 13 feet, primarily because there's an existing drainage and utility easement in this area. And it also provides additional frontage and area for landscaping. The last warrant they're requesting is for the material of the street screen. Typically, the code would require a wall. It does allow for the use of a fence by warrant. They are proposing to use a 6-foot-tall vinyl fence with landscaping. They did provide a drawing in the site plan as well as a product detail, which was provided in the application materials, showing the fence as well as a variety of landscaping with different shapes, sizes, and heights along this frontage. It is staff's opinion that this does achieve the overall intent of a street screen. It provides proper separation and distance between the living units and Live Oak frontage. It also addresses the street front by having landscaping on the outside of the front of the fence. Therefore, you're not looking at a blank wall against the entire length of the property. With that, staff does recommend approval of Resolution 2022-02 of the site plan. There is a series of conditions which we have on the next slide. We do also recommend approval of the warrant request in regards to the street screen material and the location. This is a list of your conditions. They're primarily pretty standard conditions. It's just some additional information that will need to be provided at building permit stage in regards to providing HOA documentation, capacity for the lift station, and other various requirements, street light lighting and things like that. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Have they specified the color on the fence used for the street screen?
Based on the product detail, which was in the application materials, it looks like it's going to be white, but I'll defer to the applicant if they've changed that.
I know that project changed hands. Is this just basically looking at another phase of the same?
I'll defer to the applicant, but I do believe it's a different product, but it's an extension of that development.
Does Athenian Way go all the way around the property, or is there?
So Athenian Way, for this particular property, so it starts here. So it's basically on the east and then the north-south, and I think it wraps up
No,
around
it
here.
hits Live Oak in 2 spots.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, here's a better image.
Yeah.
So yeah, Athenian Way kind of wraps around.
Okay.
Live Oak wraps around this way.
Okay.
So it's surrounded by 4 streets, but they're really 2.
Okay. Does, and it may already be on the plans, I just can't tell. Is there sidewalks all the way around Live Oak?
Yes. I know they're on the plans. I can't remember, I believe that they're already existing along here. So if they were not there, they would have to construct sidewalks, and it looks like, I believe they're constructing along Athenian.
Okay. So there's sidewalks
Yes.
leaving this development and going all the way down to the docks, right?
Correct, yeah, it wraps all the way around. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
This is a question not so much about the development as just something I'm curious about with these fences as the street screen. What requirements regarding maintenance do we have? Because so often I see a variety of these sorts of fences that get in really bad disrepair and look horrible. They turn green, they get blown over and not put back up properly sometimes. Do we have some teeth to make sure that they keep it looking nice?
So the short answer is this particular fence is a requirement of the development. So if something were to happen to it, we have all the means to go and have it be repaired. Specifically in fences in general, not necessarily, depends on the situation, but for this particular case, it's a requirement of the development, so it would have teeth.
Do they all have their, is it like, it's single residence, so they all have their own garbage cans out there and just like a regular residence? It's not, there's not a dumpster for this complex?
I don't believe so. I'll let the applicant answer that question.
Okay.
But yeah, they are individual units. Essentially, they're like duplexes, each building.
Any further questions for staff?
Yeah, just the normal question I asked. We have the water and sewer capacity to handle additional.
Yes, the numbers that they provided to us were adequate for our utilities department. They've also, one of the conditions was specific to capacity for their lift station. And our utilities, if I can get to it, department just wants them to provide verification at the site permit stage, just verifying those numbers.
We had and I don't know what the triggering mechanism is, but we had a discussion, if you remember, about, development, and are there any contribution or green space? I know this is too small to worry about that, but is there any contribution for parks and recreation? No, that's just an impact?
Pat, do you have a specific answer for that?
I know we talked about creating a requirement when we do development that parks and recreation impacts, are there any green space? Not that there's space for green space here, but is part of the impact for parks and recreation?
This development will be paying whatever impact fees are due, including Parks and Recreation. There was no requirement to include a facility with this.
I know, it's just too small for that, but
Yeah.
I understand that, but that was something that was a concern when we look at multi-unit properties. But I know this project's too small for that, but just, I don't want this to leave our thought process.
I just have a comment. It's not really a question so much, but On our agenda, it says that this is application 2175, and all over the thing, it says it's 2075. Is that
It's
just a-
2075 is the
Okay.
application number. The agenda had a
I looked
minor
at both of those and I
typo.
was like,
Yeah. It was advertised with 20, with the correct
Okay.
application.
Any further questions for staff? All right. Would the applicant like to make a presentation? State your name and address.
Dwayne Milford, MPH Civil Consultants, 7720 Polara Drive, Odessa. So I'm a civil engineer representing the applicant, Red Bank Investments. Given what staff has presented, I don't think there's a need for me to make a presentation. I think what I might do is just address a couple of things that were brought up and then be available for questions if there are any. At our last meeting, we met with a TRC upstairs a few weeks back. There was a question about maintenance of the right-of-way of Live Oak, and you brought up the matter about the fence, because I understand if that thing's got to be taken care of. And so one of the things, if you look at the bottom of page 1 of the staff report, item 3A, HOA is responsible for the maintenance of the Live Oak Street right-of-way. As I understand it, that's from the curb line to the fence and including the fence. Now, I understand that the right-of-way is what the city owns, but then there's easements beyond that. But I think the recorded HOA documents will dictate that these items be maintained. So this includes mowing the grass, maintaining this vegetation that we're planting, and then maintaining specifically, or most importantly, probably the public side of the fence. These are 5 duplexes, if you will, is what it looks like. We're doing this in the form of a townhome, so 10 townhome units. And by the way, when we started this project a few months back, this was 12 townhomes. And just after discussions with the fire marshal and some other issues we were going through, we thought it best. We had 6 duplexes here, and I do believe the duplexes might have been slightly narrower, not much, but we went with 5 duplexes, 10 units instead of the 12 units, and gained a little more green space between the units. And I think we did widen the units a little bit, not much. I mean, within a foot or so. So we have 10 units, 10 garages, individual garbage cans inside the garages, so there is no dumpster.
Okay.
Just to clarify that point. And yeah, as you said, there's not much room here for a park. Fortunately, we are able to save a decent amount, I think, of the vegetation. There's some nice oak trees on this site. Some are right in the middle. Some are actually in a low area. Just with grading and whatnot, they'll have to go, but particularly around the perimeter. It'll have a nice look from the street. But also, I think there is this condition, and I know it's not parks, but I think we probably are going to trigger the public art requirement. So while that's not a park, it is a nice feature for the community. So I don't think I had anything else unless there's questions for me.
Just a question. Are the elevations going to be consistent with what's previously there, or you have just a different style altogether?
Well, what's with so the townhomes on the north side of Athenian Way are 2-story. We're 1-story. So just with that, it's going to be a little bit different. And really, that's kind of a nice transition from Live Oak Street to the 1-story on the front, and then off in the back, the 2-story. I think they will complement. They're not identical by any means. But I think they will complement, and again, there is that transition from 2-story to 1-story to the public street. We will do things like, they have actually some nice street lighting along their side. You know, we're gonna repeat that on our side. So there'll be some things like that that'll allow it all to blend in. So the answer's something like yes and no.
Okay. Sound like a lawyer.
I am not that.
Michael, you done? You done? Yeah. So, my concern, I think, is along the line of the chairman's. Live Oak is a critical street that's going to our sponge docks. And, I mean, I would have liked to have seen a rendering of what Live Oak would look like. I appreciate the rendering on the Athenian Way side, which is very nice, but I'd like to see what Live Oak's gonna look like, because I think that's critical.
And we did provide the one detail of the wall and the vegetation, and I apologize. That was taken straight off our black line civil engineering drawing, so it's not real pretty, but that is.
Doesn't give us a sense of what is that, I mean, if it's just a white PVC fence and some brushes, you know, how attractive is that? Again, that's right before people get to the sponge docks. So.
I understand. You know, we're willing to, you know, talk to staff about, you know, if there's a different color of this fence that would look better back there.
Maybe it could be a wall, and maybe it could have something that makes it
One thing
special.
we don't want to do is construct a wall with a footer, with a tree. There's a lot of trees very close to that thing that we are able to save. You know, with a fence post versus a footer. The footer would take out a lot of tree roots. So we are trying to avoid that.
If I may, because that was my question, is why a fence instead of a wall?
Well-
Because your elevation is frankly attractive. It's a good-looking building, and I thought, why are you moving to PVC?
I think
And
we-
that makes good sense. The idea is that they're sacrificing perhaps a wall look, a concrete CMU wall, to keep trees.
Well, I can't sit here and say that's a sacrifice, but if we tried to put a normal CMU wall with a footer, we would lose a lot more trees.
Would it, following on the heels of his question and the gentleman's concern about the black line drawing, would it be possible to get an elevation of the live oak in full color that, and I know you've called out some of the plants such as a podocarpus and some of the other things, but something that really puts teeth in it that says, this is how this is gonna look, and then we can say, we're good with that, and then in the future, when it doesn't look that way, which is the nature of life in that high traffic zone, and HOAs that don't wanna spend money on the sprinkler system for 500 feet behind their place, that there's some teeth in that for enforcement in the future for the community. So would that be a possibility to get a more detailed rendition of that elevation?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm not intimately familiar with the city of Tarpon Springs process. I don't want to offer something that would delay this, and I understand we're scheduled for the Board of Commissioners for next month. I mean, is this something that we can present at that time? There's no issue with doing that. I tell you, an architect did the rendering from Athenian, and this guy, the civil engineer, did the sketch. And that was really intended as a construction sketch, not a pretty picture.
Okay.
But that can be done, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. And then I didn't mean to interrupt, so if you had more questions, but I think maybe we all got to the same place on that.
Well, one comment is that you might want to consider, there are dark green and brown versions of the same fence, and certainly something like that might blend in and look a little more natural than the white, and also they don't tend to show mold and mildew as much from sprinkler systems spraying on them over time.
I agree.
Does this have to go before historic preservation? Is that an area that's requires any other
No.
scrutiny?
No, it does not. It's
So
outside.
the only line of defense on this fence situation is us and the Board of Commissioners?
Correct. So if that's something that the Planning and Zoning Board would like to have a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, you can request that, it's a darker color. You can recommend some sort of, drawing or rendering. Those are recommendations you can make to the Board of Commissioners, because that's the next step in the process.
Well, I think it's critical that it be seen, because that's what we're going to be living with for a long, long time.
So I would recommend, with your recommendation, just be specific of the items that you recommend being a condition for the fence. So if that's the color, certain landscaping, things like that.
Well,
So without moving
mine
into-
isn't the color does, I don't have any, I'm not a colorologist like many of the Board of Commissioner members are. But,
Without going
so
into,
I don't care, it's not about colors. It's, I just want to know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and that could
Okay,
be,
I
your
mean, I don't- I don't
recommendation
know if
is
it's brown or
for
green or
them to come
whatever, I
back to
just
the
wanna know
Board
what
of
it's gonna look like.
Commissioners.
And I see that I see the front of it, which is beautiful, and I think it's a great looking project. But that backside is
Well, that-
is on a critical thoroughfare.
That backside is the city's frontage in a case, and I understand.
Well, yeah, and we don't know what it looks like other than that simplistic black and white thing we saw.
I wish I hadn't put that on the
So,
plans, but.
yeah, so I mean,
So-
that's all we got.
So yeah, so your recommendation could be to provide a rendering of the live oak frontage to show the fence and landscaping and what it would look like, and that'd be a recommendation to bring to the Board of Commissioners.
that's a very good suggestion, and I know we're in discussion, but we would like to see that before we approve.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it's just a recommendation to the BOC that's already overloaded, and I'm gonna say what the gentleman here is thinking is that they've got an appointment to meet them right away and don't want to be delayed. I don't have any more questions,
Okay,
but thank you
know,
for
and
answering.
I'm not sure what I can offer, but there's no objection to what y'all are asking, whether it, me personally, even though I am the civil engineer and not a, how do you say it, colorologist? I agree with the fence color thing. I think a non-white is a good idea. And certainly some color should be on a rendering put to these plants, the trees, the mostly live oak that are being saved would be shown in that rendering. And depending on the viewpoint, maybe you're seeing the rear roof line of the homes. And if that's what you're after, we can easily do that. I would just prefer if there's a way to do this without delaying us, we would be happy to do it.
And for our attorney, is there a way that we could send around a copy of something like that prior to the city commission meeting?
No.
No, because it wouldn't be a public meeting.
No,
right?
so you're in a position where the board does not have the power to defer this application because you need more information. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, it's up to the applicant to provide sufficient evidence for you to consider to make the determination. If the applicant wishes to defer to next month's meeting, of course, then it would push back the Board of Commissioners meeting as well. The applicant has every right to do that. Otherwise, the applicant can say, no, I'd like to move forward tonight. You vote on your recommendation one way or the other. Put in your recommendations to the Board of Commissioners what you'd like to see. But the only way that this application comes back before you is if the applicant itself decides that it wants to take a step back and provide that additional information.
So if we recommended a more ornate landscaping plan, or recommend a more suitable landscaping plan because that is a gateway into the Sponge Dock area, I suspect, and I've been wrong before, that our commission, because they know it's a gateway into the sponge dock area, I think they would be more inclined to require through site plan review and other requirements that it, in fact,
But is that our job to
we can make a
punt?
recommendation.
Is that our job to
Well,
punt and assume they're going to
I'm
do
not
something?
punting, but let's be honest, no matter what we do, we always have the risk of the city commission ignoring what we
Oh,
recommend.
that
anyway.
goes without saying.
Okay, so
But
I suspect, I like to,
I like to pretend that we,
oh, I know that, but I think I think of making a recommendation, the commissioners understand, at least I hope they would understand, that as a gateway into the sponge dock area, they would want to see an enhanced landscape plan as part of their approval process, which gives you a month to come up with a landscape plan that I suspect not only the commission, but those out who come to the commission meetings who understand the portal into the sponge docks needs to be much beautification. We need more beautification into that area. So I'm willing to make a motion. Well, once we get there, but make a recommendation with regard to a requirement that an enhanced landscape plan be presented to the commission as part of their process.
One question, if I may. Up until now, I heard rendering, and now I'm hearing landscape plan. Are we really talking about the same thing? We just want to see what this looks like.
Yeah.
If I'm out in Live Oak Street, what am I seeing?
I think, I think elevation or perspective
Yeah.
would be more suitable for everybody to really be able to visualize, because a lot of people don't visualize well from a plan.
Even to tighten that up, to answer your question, I think screen wall is the correct term that we're referring to
Screen,
here. So
Street screen.
a street screen, elevation, street screen rendering that accurately reflects the intent. And I might suggest that it's really gussied up.
well, I'm going to,
Yeah, it could.
I'm just letting you know, I'm going to vote for denial unless, I'm going to vote for denial because we don't have that. We don't know, this is such a critical spot. The applicant, for whatever reason, showed us what the one side looks like, but doesn't show us what the other side looks like. And that's the critical side, because that's the side that, 50% of the tourists coming into Tarpon Springs are going to see. And I think it's critical. So whether that delays them or not, that's not, in all due respect, that's not our issue. Our issue is, do we have enough evidence here to approve this project today? And we don't, and we're saying we'll approve it pending that they show the Board of Commissioners something, but they haven't shown us, and we have to vote. So I'm just telling you that I'm going to vote no.
Okay, are there no further questions for the applicant? Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none,
May I ask a question?
sure.
Did I understand that either I can ask to delay this, or y'all are gonna, and what happens if this board votes us down?
If the board recommends, so this isn't, the Planning and Zoning Board functions as the city's local planning agency, and this board serves in advisory capacity. So if the board here recommends denial with conditions, which it can do, the next step is it goes to the Board of Commissioners for consideration. The Board of Commissioners will make the final determination on the application. If the board recommends approval with certain conditions, the same thing happens. It's a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. But you do have the option of setting this for a date certain for next month's meeting if you want to bring additional information back. But you can also supplement your application between this meeting and the Board of Commissioners meeting.
Is there a path, if this board votes no, for us to come back and get this board's, to get this board to reconsider?
So if this board recommends no, your next step is going to the Board of Commissioners. They can either choose to approve it or they can choose to deny it. So the final decision rests with them.
Okay, so
If-
if this board votes, no matter what, we're going to the Board of Commissioners, I can't then say.
Either way, right. And then the Board of Commissioners will make the final determination. If they decline to accept the application, then you can amend the application and then you would be back before the Planning and Zoning Board. But if they choose to approve your application, then you're done with that part of the process.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess at this point, I'll leave it to the board. I mean, we're here tonight for this board to vote. I hope that because of a stated fence color, and I'm not sure that was intended, I don't know how that came about. We should have left that as an alternate, but there's no issue with this fence being a different color. I think if this vegetation that I showed on that sketch is shown in a color format and the perspective pulled back to where you can see maybe a longer section of the fence, probably don't want to see that lift station, but it's there. The trees that we are saving on either side of the fence, and then the rear roof line of these homes. I think this board and the commission at the next meeting would like what we're doing. So, and I apologize that we didn't have that second rendering, but I do believe that once you saw such a thing, you would like what we're doing. And Red Bank Investments, this is the Mavromatis family. They do not want to do anything that's a black eye on the city of Tarpon Springs or on this roadway or people traveling to the sponge docks. They certainly don't want to do that. So anyway, thank you.
Okay.
So can I ask the city attorney a question?
Sure.
So can we do, again, a qualified approval with the recommendation that a specific rendering be given to the Board of Commissioners? That can we have in our approval our concern? Like, is there a way for us to express our concerns, still approve the project, but express our concerns so that so we can make sure that they focus on that?
So certainly, and that's true of any application that comes before you. You can recommend approval with specific conditions, that you recommend approval as long as we got to see X, Y, Z. You didn't get to see it, but you would recommend approval if maybe you got to see those things, and then be specific about what those things are. If we would approve this project, if we got to see a full color rendering of the project from live oak to see the amount of vegetation that was put up for the street screen wall, something like that. That way you have a specific recommendation to the Board of Commissioners that they can sit there and look at and say, oh, they would have approved it if they would have got to see this to this degree.
A conditional approval?
I mean, that's what you're recommending anyways. Anytime you recommend an approval with conditions, it's a conditional approval, right? You're only recommending it if the conditions are met.
Chairperson, I'd be happy to structure that motion and I think the verbiage that everybody might be comfortable
Yeah,
with.
you got the terminology. I just know, see, I'm looking at an enhanced landscape plan, but you got the terminology, so.
Yeah, and it's not about colors. That's not my issue, is color. I just want to see it. I want to know what that's going to look like. It's
Just
just
the
too
package.
critical. It's just too critical right there.
And if you guys too, in your motion, if you can make it specific to one of the criteria with the site plan, and this is specific to the warrant, so I think you should craft your motion to make sure it's specific to the warrant. That way the commission knows exactly what the issue is, and they can maybe take a closer look at that. The more specific you are, in my opinion, and from a legal perspective, the more specific you are, the better it is to send that recommendation to the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
So before I make that motion, I want to follow up on that conversation because I actually want to share my concern about how critical this view is. We've all agreed on that. That there is a warrant being requested, which is a waiver, you know, it's a fancy word for that, and that we don't want to be surprised 2 years from now as to how that looks.
Yeah.
And the gentleman made a comment that we can't see on this paper is that there's going to be an exposed sewer pump station along that side.
Yeah.
Now, it's going to have a fence around it, but I know what mine looks like in my neighborhood. It looks like
Yeah.
a pump station.
Well, then the pump station is already there, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It's that rectangle straight above the word street at the right there.
Okay. So is that already in place?
Yes.
Well, I've ridden by it a whole bunch of times and never saw it. Oopsie daisy.
Time you go by.
Okay, well, I guess if we're ready, I'll give her a go.
All right, is there any other discussion of the board before he starts his motion?
I want to make sure, forgive me, I want to make sure I have that warrant call out done correctly, so I want to see the verbiage for that specific request.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything, but warrant number 1, allow the use of a fence with landscaping as the required street screen. That's what we're talking about.
Yes, sir, it is.
What does the fence look like? What does the landscaping look like?
And actually, the other warrant is allowing more space on the Live Oak side rather than less, correct?
Yes, sir, but the reason is there are utility and drainage easements that encumber our property along both frontages. We can't build this thing where we're supposed to.
Well, having the fence further back is a plus as far as I'm concerned anyways.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, I'm going to motion in regards to application number 21-17, application 21-75.
It's application 20-75.
Thank you. 20-75, site plan approval for Live Oak at Anclote River Crossings. I motion that we approve with special conditions and considerations in regards to the number 1 warrant for street screen, specifically conditioned that the applicant provide a detailed elevation and rendering of the street screen with the construction behind it, and as best detail and enhanced landscape plan as part of that street screen.
Second.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Ms. Vihel?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
I want to thank staff and this board for kind of helping us through this. And by the way, someone said a month from now. It's actually 2 weeks. And I just want y'all to know I understand that. So February 8th is the board meeting, so we'll be ready.
Start drawing.
Well, the guy
I'll
that-
touch base. I'll touch base with you and give you the deadlines.
Okay, thank you very much.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
All right, that brings us to item number 8 on our agenda, application 21-170. There are 3 items that all work together on this application: annexation of property, future land use map amendment, and zoning map amendment. Do we have 3 separate votes on those ultimately, or is it
Correct.
one
Yeah,
vote?
we can take, as we have with all of the other ones like this, we'll take them as one for presentation of the evidence. However, when making the motions for recommendation, we'll take the separate, first the annexation, then the future land use, and then the rezoning, or the zoning map amendment.
Okay. Can we have the staff presentation?
Yes, thank you, Pat McNeese, Principal Planner. This is, comes in under the owner name of Stacy's Car Wash. I believe it's, the car wash is actually called Jallo or Jallo Express. You may have noticed this car wash going up on the northwest corner of Klosterman and 19. And this is a request to actually, I'll just skip ahead. Basically, this is about almost nearly an acre. The applicant did pull permits, building permits under Pinellas County, and when it came time to connect to water, of course, they are required to annex in or apply for annexation for water and sewer service. So that's how this kind of came about. Again, this is at the corner of Klosterman and 19. This is St. Pete College. This is in the municipal limits. This is the racetrack. That's a gas station, which is in the municipal limits as well. This is adjacent across the street. So it is required to be annexed in. This is just a closer view. This is the previous development that was on the site. You're probably familiar. It was a car wash and auto sales. So these are the current Pinellas County future land use map and zonings, and the proposed categories are commercial general for our future land use map and highway business for our zoning. So they do have city water. They were not adjacent to the city until racetrack came in, but now they need to expand that water account, obviously, for a car wash. This is an expanded operation over what was there before. And they do need sewer service. Apparently it's served by a septic tank. And sewer service is available. They will have to extend that line along their property line to reach the connection. So they will be doing that at their own expense. The previous development was demolished, and again, Pinellas County issued the permits for that project. And this is the layout, basically, of what we've got. This is what it kind of used to look like, and this is just under construction here. There is a billboard there at the site that is the only thing remaining, really. Again, for your annexation criteria, this will not create an enclave. It is adjacent to the city limits now. It is in the service area for all of our public facilities, and the wastewater line will be extended by the applicant. And the property is consistent with the future land use map series, and it will not require a countywide amendment because it's under retail and services now, will continue to be. Our commercial general category actually allows less density and less intensity than the current Pinellas County zone, future land use and zoning. So that will actually be decreased, that potential. With respect to the future land use map amendment, the project is consistent in general with the comprehensive plan. This is a car wash up on our 19 commercial corridor. You've seen at least one other one recently, and this is where these things kind of are placed in our code, in a highway business commercial strip type environment. There are some items that do not conform to our code. Specifically, and those are spelled out as far as what's non-conforming in the staff report. The vehicle stacking, the size of the dumpster enclosure, the landscape buffer size. They've got 5-foot buffers, and we require 8-foot buffers. It does appear that they have more than than our required tree count, so they're pretty good there. The signage and lighting design standards that were adopted several months back, they will not be able to comply with those. And the freestanding sign is a little bit too close to the side property line. So again, as far as the rezoning, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, recognizing those code inconsistencies that I just pointed out. Again, this is on a commercial corridor, and it is appropriate. This is a use by right under our code for highway business. And the property already has public infrastructure available, and the amendment will not exceed the capacity of the city to serve the property. I will say that there are, this is a redevelopment, and in spite of the code inconsistencies that I listed, there are some pluses for redeveloping this property. We got rid of a not so great looking auto sales, in my opinion, I guess, use right there on the corner. We're getting rid of a septic tank. This development is reducing the curb cuts on 19 down to 1. They are providing a stub out for frontage connection here. So there are some pluses to this. It is reducing the impervious surface from 96% to 70%. So there are some pluses with this property being redeveloped and cleaned up. So staff is recommending approval of all of the ordinances, which you'll be able to take one at a time for consideration. And this was publicly noticed, and we didn't receive any responses to those notices. Any questions?
I have a question. Go ahead. Pat, is this a net financial positive for the city in the sense that we will be getting more revenue from this property versus the amount of that we are expending in resources?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking, will this property increase in value as far as property tax? I would imagine.
Yeah, 'cause right now we get nothing from this property, correct? Because it's.
Yeah, well, anything we annex in, yeah.
Okay, so they're going to be.
City taxes.
Yeah, so they're going to be fees to connect to our sewer and
Yes.
such, and then they're going to pay for water, and they're going to pay property taxes and
Yeah.
all that. So we'll have a certain amount of revenue coming in, and then the net expenditure of resources seems incidental, right?
Yes,
Okay,
the
so
only,
it just looks like a net positive financially for the city.
yeah, the city will not be expending any financial resources to extend that sewer line, which is the main thing. And I believe, I'm not sure the applicant might know if they are paying right now the 25% premium for not being annexed in. So they won't have to pay that anymore on their water.
Okay.
So,
I have probably more of a comment than a question, and it doesn't just relate to this project, but to others we've seen in similar situations. It seems to me like people are doing their projects backwards to avoid the city of Tarpon Springs requirements when Pinellas County's requirements are perhaps less stringent in some cases. And I have a little bit of a problem with that. I think if you're going to annex into the city of Tarpon Springs, you should do it before you permit and build something, not after the fact, and then we have to accept things that don't meet our codes. And if we can't stop accepting these, maybe our codes need to change to make sure that if people are going to need our utilities, they annex before they do their development, so their development meets our codes.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, I'm not so sure that you can require them to
But we
not develop their private property rights before annexing.
I understand
Annexing
that,
is-
but we get handcuffed as a board that somebody will go to Pinellas County. I'm not saying this is the case, but we've seen this often where they'll go to the county, get their approvals, which are like the chairman said, are a lot more lenient than ours, and then all of a sudden, they because they have no other alternative for utilities, that we're kind of forced to
Correct.
annex them.
And you are, because annexations are quasi-judicial, so as long as they meet the criteria, you are required to approve annexations.
So,
I do have some questions for staff, and I know I didn't want to interrupt,
No.
but it kind of like we're getting into a conversation,
Right,
and I
and
actually
I
have some
think it's a more
questions.
general conversation too,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Well, it does concern my position on this item, but
Well, as far as your position on the item, because it's specific to the annexation, I'll reiterate what I just said. It's a quasi-judicial proceeding, so as long as the evidence demonstrates that they meet the criteria for an annexation into the city, this board is required to recommend approval for that. That's, one of the things, that is not a legislative decision where you can say, okay, well, what if this, what if that? That is something that the law is the law, and as long as they meet the criteria, then you are required to annex them in.
Why would it have to come in front of this board? I mean, if,
Because you are serving as the local planning agency for the city of Tarpon Springs.
so,
And that is a land use change, it's a land development regulation, it is required to come before the planning and zoning board.
so we're,
This board member is not required to vote yes on anything.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to adhere to the requirements of the law, then you may be, depending upon the evidence that's fleshed out at the hearing.
So I do have some questions for staff, if I may. Does anybody mind? Okay. First, I can't tell for sure, but it sure looks like this was a gas station at one point in its life.
I kind of guessed that in the staff report.
What certification and verification do we have that the old gas tanks and the old system that might be lurking underneath there has been properly removed and disposed of?
That would have to be a question for the applicant.
Okay, super. If we were to approve annexation under a very strange application of a building in progress, would that mean that the permit process would have to start over and they would be permitted through our building department?
No, so the day this becomes annexed in, which would have to be at the earliest March 16th, depending on where they are, we pick up from there. So if they, any inspections that have not been done, we would pick up. If the building wasn't CO'd yet, we would have to CO it. So we would pick up where at that point, wherever they are in the process.
So our building department would be forced to accept the plans and project and the status that it's in. Would they, building department, be able to charge for those inspections and the review process that goes with it?
That, I don't know.
Okay.
Not
So we
sure.
don't know the answer to that, that there's a building, a major construction, commercial building that our building department would be forced to accept as is in whatever state of the construction process it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, super. I got another question. Building department. Okay, this is a little bit more general. Can you tell me why again the applicant needs to midstream jump from county to the city of Tarpon Springs? And thank you for pointing out the benefits that are there. That was nice. But why, again, do they need to jump in this very unusual time?
they need connection to expanded water and to sewer before they can, apparently, and the applicant can speak to this, apparently before they can go any further. Section 2023 of the city's municipal code requires that properties contiguous to the municipal limits have to annex in to receive water and sewer service.
So, but I'm confused, and you've probably told me the answer, but I need to hear it again. They're already receiving City of Tarpon Springs water.
Yes, but apparently they need to expand the gallons per day over what was being used on site. It's probably mainly the sewer that's triggering this, to tell you the truth.
And I know we can speak to the applicant, but heck, shouldn't we know? Wouldn't this have been part of the TRC? Is the water and sewer more than the county wants to accept?
There's no
I mean, I want to know why.
There's no sewer, they're on septic.
Okay.
No, the property is served by the city. It is not served by the county for utilities. It's
Okay.
always been served, well, it is served by the city. We serve unincorporated properties.
Okay.
They have to pay a premium if they are not adjacent to city limits. And they have to record a restrictive covenant that says, hey, when I become adjacent to the city, I have to annex. So when they do become adjacent to the city, that water service that they're getting continue, if they want it expanded or continued, then they have to annex in.
Okay, so I think I'm getting closer now. So what I'm hearing is that it's actually a function of city administrative municipal code
Yeah.
that because the property across the street became City of Tarpon Springs, that now they must annex, the
Yes.
applicant must annex in order to get more water than they're currently receiving.
Right.
So their hand is being forced. It's not even an option for the applicant.
That's correct. Yeah.
And nobody knew this until the building's half built.
Well, I'll let the applicant answer that. I can tell you that there were several attempts made, beginning with demolition of the previous site over time. And
Please
unless you,
expand.
you
No,
know.
I'd like to hear
Yeah,
it. Please
I mean, we
expand.
received the application for annexation when it was very clear that we were not going to allow the utilities connection until we got that application. So, yeah, that we've been, the staff has obviously observed this issue and over time, you know, I mean,
And has,
So we
and forgive me,
notify-
I understand. And
Yeah.
if you don't mind me asking one more question,
okay.
has the building official had an opportunity to weigh in on this yet?
To weigh in on,
Meaning, was the building official part of the TRC?
yes,
And they signed off and said, because we don't get that TRC report. We just assume that,
well, there's nothing for them to review on an annexation, really, and rezoning. So
other than a half-built commercial building.
they, you know, if it comes into the city before it's finished, they just automatically inherit where it is, and that's just how the city-county tandem works, any of the cities. They just automatically would inherit the rest of the process until the building's CO'd. So,
Thank you, Pat, very
Okay.
much.
It
Appreciate
says
that.
on here that the TRC reviewed their construction plan, and they looked at their conformance, but they had no other comments on that. Is there a reason why they didn't want to give us any kind of comments, or why they did after they reviewed the city code? The
are
city
you
code
talking about TRC?
Yeah, it's on page 7 of 7. It says, "The TRC reviewed the project on December 9th, 2021 for completeness and conformance of the comprehensive zoning and landing code. The TRC required the applicant to submit a full plan, set the project under construction to allow a review for the city code. There was no further comments from the TRC." So is there a reason why they weren't giving us any more comments or telling us what they came up after looking at that plan?
Yes, so the TRC did not have a full set of plans in front of them. The requirement for the full set of plans they required that a full set be submitted before we would schedule this for public hearing
Okay.
and allow utilities connections.
So that means that they have the plan now.
We do have it now, it's in your backup.
Okay.
But I can tell you that the building department is not, they will not be looking at those plans unless the Board of Commissioners
Nice.
adopts an annexation, yeah. There's no reason for them to
That's
do
kind of like a
that.
standstill at both ends. Okay.
Is this, I'm so sorry, thank you, that was a great question, forgive me, I'm wondering, is this the full set of plans that we have? I know it printed kind of funky.
Oh, okay.
Like a puzzle.
Yeah, that's attached to the back of your,
It came out like a puzzle. It's kind of like-
okay, I'm sorry about that.
I don't think that was intended, but I
No.
just,
No,
No,
it wasn't.
I keep searching for what this might look like when it's done, and I can't tell.
Pat? Just for clarification, now, they could have completed this construction, right? And then at some point require additional water, and then this annexation could then have taken place, right? So this could be a completed structure, and then it could get annexed.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
because completed structures get annexed in town all the time, right?
That's true.
Okay, so it's, whether it's in construction or already had been constructed using Pinellas County rules and regulations and standards, it still could have got annexed.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to make a presentation? And state your name and address, please.
Hey, good evening, council, commission members, I apologize. My name is Jairus Barbie. I'm principal planner with Beacon Civil Engineering, here on behalf of the applicant, Troy Carter, and the property owner as well. I would like to go ahead and say I agree with staff's recommendation as presented, but I would like to go ahead and analyze a few of the things that I heard you speaking over. So I was brought into the process a little late in the game on this particular process because generally during our land development process, we don't run into an issue that causes us to come forward and get an annexation and a future land use amendment as well as a rezoning. But from the beginning of this project, when they were doing the due diligence upon this property, they thought that they would be able to utilize this sewer system and water connection as previously existing. And through the permitting process with the county, it was noticed that use of that septic tank would no longer be viable for such a use, as well as the estimated gallons needed for the project did increase since previous methods and calculations of development were used from the prior construction. So that causes us to have to come back to do this. I would like to say that in a perfect world, we would have tried to come to you all first and try to hammer this all out up front, and I do deeply apologize on my client's behalf as well as my firm's behalf for this, for lack of a better word, confusion. And so my apologies there on behalf of my firm. But what we would like to do is to try to move forward and build a good relationship between us and the city and the property owner here to bring a beneficial commercial property into the city's jurisdiction to provide additional taxes to the city, as well as to construct a force main extension, which will have the ability for other users to tie in as well with that additional capacity and extension. So I would guess that we would probably not be the last applicants in this immediate area that you may see come forward in the future for this similar situation. So what I would just like to say is I apologize for the confusion. We want to be good neighbors. We want to be good developers here and try to do the right thing. So we believe that what we've brought forward is in compliance and with the comprehensive plan and policies and procedures, as well as the land development regulations for the annexation and rezoning criteria. I would like to also note that the means in which we were noted to be deficient to the land development code standards would be included as legal non-conforming standards. Is that correct, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. So if the property is ever changed in any manner that triggers us to go back to that site plan review, the site will have to be fully reconfigured to provide these elements. But it has been reviewed by DOT as well as county traffic engineers, and we have provided a safe means of ingress and egress to the property, cut down on curb cuts there, and tried to provide a better corner to your city. So I would be happy to take any questions, and I apologize for the confusion, and I empathize.
Do we have questions for the applicant?
I think you had asked a question. There was I know for a fact that place it was a contaminated corner. Did they remove the tanks out of there?
My apologies. I did miss that question. I am not aware of the detail of that, but that is one of the particular things that are reviewed during the site plan review to make sure that there are any contaminants taken care of, as far as with our approved stormwater management report and design. So those things are looked at, and it had been looked at at that time through Pinellas County. I'm not 100% certain, so I do not want to give you the wrong answer.
So you don't know if the tanks were removed or not?
I do not know 100% certain, but traditionally, if there were tanks there and we have gone through a period of redevelopment, those would be removed and remediated.
So that'll lead to this question, but you weren't part of that initial process, were you?
No, sir, I was not. I'm the principal planner with the firm, and I take care of land use matters, rezonings, comprehensive plan amendments, and typical quasi-judicial items like you all have in front of you today.
So I'm sorry, forgive me for interrupting.
No problem.
I didn't mean you personally, so maybe I misunderstood. Was your firm part of the initial site plan production and review with the county?
Yes, sir, they were. We performed and designed this project that was approved by the county, and it's here before you today.
But you
Correct.
can't say with confidence that your firm verified that the site had been cleaned and was ready for redevelopment.
I can't say that I am personally known to know that there were fuel tanks on the site and that they were remediated or what have you, but
Is there a chance that they're still there?
I would not think there would be a high chance through seeing all of my other projects that have been redeveloped. I apologize for not having the answer for that.
Pat, wouldn't that have been a standard of the county to?
I believe it would. If it's okay, I'd like to ask the applicant, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. Do you know if that project had to comply fully with Pinellas County stormwater regulations, or was it just adaptation of what was there.
I believe that it had to fully comply with the standards of Pinellas County because we had to perform a full design and report for the project, and the impervious was reduced from 0.9 to 0.7, and
Okay.
additional on-site drainage and attenuation has been provided with this plan.
Okay, and I will say that Pinellas County stormwater regs are a little bit more stringent than ours right now. The other thing is, I'm assuming that, you know, all those underground tanks are monitored by Department of Environmental Protection. That's a state agency. I'm assuming that they needed to, you know, anybody that's building, demolishing like they did, would have had to address the condition, any leakage. You know, whether they're absolutely required to remove them or not, I can't answer that.
Yeah, Florida DEP has very strict standards on that sort of thing, and had they, assuming they would have been aware that there was an old tank there, their requirements would have had to been
I know
met.
for certain a couple of deals fell through that property because of contaminants, so, some buyers had walked away a few times on that property.
Yeah.
It had been for sale for quite a while. So that I know for certainty, so.
If I may add, we've done a similar project in the area, and it did have on-site fuel tanks, and we did have to go in and remediate those to the full extent as required by FDEP prior to constructing any improvements on that property. And those those tanks are traditionally monitored and kept a list of tanks that have fell out of compliance or have produced some type of contamination, and and they have to be remediated as such.
All right, if there's no further questions of the applicant, you may step down. And are there any members of the public here that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, would anybody like to craft a motion?
And keep in mind, we need 3 separate motions, one for each.
True.
I'd like to make a motion to approve application number 21-170, A.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Ms. Vihil?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. Can we have a motion on the future land use map amendment?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve application number 21-170B, future land use map amendment.
I'll second it.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Ms. Vihil?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. All right. A motion on the zoning map amendment, please.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept application number 21-170C, zoning map amendment.
I'll second that too.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Ms. Vihil?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. All right. Item passes. That
Thank you.
brings us down to item number 9, staff presentation and discussion.
Yes, this is intended to be your third and final kind of training module. This one's a fairly short one, but I will leave it to the pleasure of the board whether you want to do this evening or if it's getting too late or too cold out. You want to, that's fine.
I'd make a motion to defer if that's possible.
Okay,
But we love your presentations, Pat.
I know.
We
I'll second that we love your presentations.
Okay, we'll reschedule that. Thank you.
Yes, definitely reschedule to a night that we move quicker.
I have a strange request. At the next Board of Commissioner meeting, they are entertaining a motion to put a moratorium on building apartments in Tarpon Springs. And I'm going to ask the chairman if he would entertain a straw vote that of whether this board would like to hear that in advance of that we should hear such a motion.
It is my understanding that if they decide they want to do that, it has to come back to us and then back to them. But
Correct. If they decide on the moratorium, it will have to be in ordinance form or resolution form, depending upon how procedurally they do it, and it will come before this board.
Okay, we'll come back here.
Right. Because again, you're the local planning agency, so it has to do with land development, and it will
All right.
come before you. So you will see it, if it happens.
I had no idea. Thanks for the update.
yeah, they tried to take it up at the last meeting, and,
Yeah.
and it got too late, and they decided to wait. But, okay, was there other staff comments before?
Yes, I've got 3 items. First is, the question came up, this board, and we have one other board that starts their meeting at 7 o'clock. Apparently, that's a holdover from some time past. We would like to ask the board if you feel like a 6:30 start time would be something you would want to do. If so, we'd like to get a consensus to bring back your rules of procedure under resolution for you to consider adopting a 6:30 regular start time.
I'd even go 6.
Do I hear 6?
I like 6, and then
The earlier
it's
the better
8:30
as
now,
far
we'd
as
be
I'm
home by
concerned.
7:30.
I can certainly coordinate with all the staff that's involved I asked about 6:30, but I will ask them again about 6. We do have.
Not 6.
Yeah, that
I
might be
still
tough for
work.
you. Yeah.
Can you get here by 6, do you think?
No, not from Clearwater.
Oh, okay.
I get off at 5, so-
6:30, okay?
6:30 is fine.
I was gonna say, you could just make it from Clearwater at
If I'm
6, because
lucky,
I
I'm
would be
close to-
doing
Depends
this.
on the traffic jam.
I might be able to come running in at 6
6:15,
o'clock.
can we do 6? No, I'm just kidding.
I'd be good with 6:30.
Okay, so I'll bring something back next meeting on that. I handed out the public hearing schedules, and I might have done that already once, so
Yeah.
that's just for that. And just a reminder to attend the appointed board's workshop next Wednesday at 6 o'clock for the comprehensive plan. You should have received your invitation to that.
I did, but would you refresh my memory, that date and time?
This is Wednesday, February 2nd, starting at 6 p.m.
And where will that be?
It's at the
Is it the rec-
SBC Tarpon Springs
Oh.
campus. It's going to
This-
be in
Is that in the
there.
library where the strategic meeting was last week?
Yes. Yep, I believe it's the same room.
Yeah.
I move to adjourn.
Is that, is that the last of the staff comments?
Yes, thank you.
And any board comments?
I have one. I'm so sorry.
All right.
I happened to catch a sustainable board meeting on YouTube, totally by coincidence. And I knew we had a sustainable board, and I knew more or less that they were active. But it struck me as curious that we don't receive any input from what I get is probably a very valuable board. And this is just a comment. I would think that as a planning and zoning board, that they would see perhaps the things that we see, and as related would make comment or whatever their process is, and that it might be it might be admitted as the package that we get, much like the TRC board. So I just find it curious, and I don't know what that process is or why we don't hear a peep, unless I've been missing it, the input from the sustainability board, because obviously they have a tremendous amount of impact on all of the projects that we're looking at.
That was actually, somebody had mentioned that before, that even at the commission level, there's no, I guess sometimes recommendation or input from them, because everybody kind of wondered, what do they do? Because it's not part of our process.
So I understand they're not quasi-judicial, but I think they're a valuable board. They were,
No, I understand that, but when there's a recommendation that comes from staff, there's nothing that says that they've reviewed any application or any, so the comment that somebody had made one time, what do they do?
yes.
Because that we know they meet. They know they have recommendations, but who hears or gets input? I don't know, do they input the staff and then they?
Yes, so the Sustainability Committee has been, right now, their main goal is to develop a sustainability action plan. That's what they've been working on since they started. So the idea would be, generally, that out of this plan would come lots of things. Maybe policies, city projects, recommendations for code changes, comp plan changes. So that's where the sustainability stuff would get into a code or a comprehensive plan that you all would then need to, vet on each project. That's kind of how that would work. I will say that they are also going to be at the comp plan meeting. They've been invited to that meeting next week, so they will. I'm assuming most of them won't be there, so we could bring that up at that time as well.
Can I ask a question of the city attorney? Sure. On one of the topic points at a recent forum was whether or not the Board of Commissioners should or could be overruled by the board. That the Planning and Zoning Board, a ruling could be overruled by the Board of Commissioners. Is there a state law that requires that the Board of Commissioners, as we're a quasi-judicial, they're quasi-judicial, that all things must go to a Board of Commissioners?
So no, there is no state law that requires that all things must go to a Board of Commissioners. In the city of Tarpon Springs, in every jurisdiction, the Board of Commissioners serves as the legislative body of the city. So in some communities, the Planning and Zoning Board is not advisory. It actually has final decision-making on certain things.
Okay.
All pieces of legislation do go before the Board of Commissioners for final say because they are, again, the city's legislative arm. And that includes some quasi-judicial hearings. In a majority of communities, I can't speak to all communities in the state of Florida, but in the majority of communities that either our firm represents or that we know we've dealt with in the past, there are certain things that stop at the Planning and Zoning Board, and that's it. There are certain things that are done on a staff level, administratively, but large land development regulations or projects go to a Board of Commissioners.
And if in those municipalities that have where the Planning and Zoning Board has
Final decision-making power.
Decision-making, the alternatives now for the applicant are either remedy whatever the deficiency was with the planning and zoning, and they can bring it back again, correct?
It depends. That's very specific to the individual jurisdiction and what their code says. So it could be.
It could be that, and it also could then be.
It could also be you appeal to the courts or you appeal to the Board of Commissioners.
And
Right.
appeal it with the court. Okay,
Right. For instance,
there are options beyond Board of Commissioners. Even in the situation we have today, they could still go to the court. Right? Even, they can.
No, they can't go to the court from this board. You
No,
don't
they
have
could go
final
to the court-
decision-making from the Board of
Currently, they could go to the
Commissioners.
court from the
Board of Commissioners, right. Whoever has the final decision-making power. So for instance, the Board of Adjustment in the city of Tarpon Springs has final decision-making power for variances. Whatever decision that board makes is not appealable to the Board of Commissioners, it's appealable to the Circuit Court in Pinellas County. Differently is the Heritage Preservation Board. They are also a quasi-judicial board with final decision-making power. But the way that the code is structured, if they make a decision and they make a final decision, that determination is appealable to the Board of Commissioners. So it really just depends on what your code says. And the code, of course, is written by the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, but there's not state law that mandates all things go to the Board of Commissioners.
No, there's no state law that says all things must go to the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the only state law applicable to this board is that the city of Tarpon Springs must have a local planning agency, and this board functions as that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
One comment request, I guess, that I'd like to make quickly is, in the case of these annexations like we had tonight, I would like to ask our staff and our legal representative to put their heads together and perhaps come up with suggestions as to what changes could be made in our code, if that's what's necessary, to prevent this situation from coming up, or at least limit it to fewer instances, because it's kind of a loophole that developers can take advantage of to avoid complying with our code. And in the case of the one tonight, it was relatively minor, but there could be more serious cases, and I'd have a problem with seeing that happen.
Okay, we'll do that. Thanks.
All right. No further board comments? We stand adjourned.
Ms. B. Hill?